Welcome. Today we are talking about creating manuscript format for Microsoft Word for long fiction, so novel length fiction. If you consider how many hours you put into writing your novel, do not let the package that you presented in detract from the novel. So it's not as if you miss one thing and an agent or editor is going to reject you. It's more dressing it up like you would put on a suit and a tie or a dress or some sort of appropriate attire for an interview. Your document is going to be the first thing that the agent or editor sees, so make it presentable in the way that is what they require. A couple of caveats when we get started. I have listed, if you'll look here, you can see these are some guidelines for manuscript format. And I will post those along with the video. But what I want you to know is that each individual agent or editor or their company will have specific requirements. So always check the publisher's requirements when you're getting ready to submit. And I mention this because I had helped someone with a submission a few years back for a particular editor at a specific house. And even though the general rule is that your manuscript should be double spaced, this particular editor wanted it at 1.5. So always give them what they're asking for. Make sure you verify their submission guidelines before you format and then submit your work. The other thing that I want to say is that I am currently using a Mac, and so a lot of my commands will be, they're in Microsoft Word, but the Mac version of Word is somewhat different than the Windows version and the 365 version. I will let you know when there are variations, and I'll also say if you know another way to do something, I'm going to give you some suggestions, but use the one that's most intuitive to you so that you can do this quickly. Back in the day, there was a rule that you submitted your manuscripts in Courier New font. And the purpose for that was that it was easy because each letter takes up the same amount of space. It was easy for them to be able to estimate word count based on your format. Now that we have digitized our files, there are things that have changed, and one of them is that it does not need to be in Courier New font. It is just a readable serif font as a general rule. Times New Roman is considered sort of the industry standard, but if you go differently, they're not going to just reject you for not having the right thing. So if you do a Command or Control A, that's a shortcut in Word to highlight everything. And when you do that, it helps build consistency. If you've ever been working in a file and it feels like it just changed font, it probably had sort of the kernels of hidden format that still had that font in there. So a Command or Control A will highlight everything, and then we're going to change the font to Times New Roman 12. There are multiple places where you can do this. I just think the easiest one is right here. Times New Roman comes up quickly in my list because that's what I typically use. But if you haven't used it before, you'll have to scroll down to the T's or type a T and get to Times New Roman. And then we're just going to make sure it's 12 points, and it should be. The entire manuscript should be double spaced. And I don't know if you can tell, but this is definitely single spaced. So there's a couple ways to get to the line spacing options. In the Mac and I believe the Windows version, there's this little arrow in the Home tab. So this is the Home tab right here. There's these two arrows pointing away from each other in the line and paragraph options section. And if you select that, it gives you the option of line spacing options. In the 365 version, you'll just have to search for line spacing options to find it because it is not in the same exact place. But it should look the same. So your line spacing options should have 3 sections. We've got a section for indent and spacing, indentations, and then line spacing. So here we're going to change it to double spaced. And then I'm not going to adjust these, and I'll show you why in a minute. If we select OK, now you can see everything is double spaced, and that messed up my formatting because I had these things single spaced at the beginning, but that's okay because that kind of lets you see why it's important to format it correctly the first time so you don't end up having to reformat sections. The next thing we want to do is make sure that the margins are 1 inch all the way around. And I've been looking at them long enough that I can tell whether something is approximately right, but don't trust your eyeballs. Check and make sure. So you go to Layout, select Margins, and make sure it's set to 1 inch all the way around. If somebody has changed and customized your version of Word, it might have been changed. The other reason it might change is older versions of Word for Mac did a 1 1/4 inch margin, so it was a little bit different. So make sure that it's 1 inch all the way around for the entire manuscript. All right, let's talk about the title page. The title page serves, I'm going to delete these just so we can put the title page there. The purpose of the title page is to let them know to where to send the checks, right? No, it's where to contact you. So you include your name, I'll get rid of the bolds here in a second, your address, I'm really not in England, but today we'll pretend, and your phone number, your email address. You may also, and this isn't a requirement, but I would definitely put my website down so that they know where to find me. And I might even make that a hyperlink. It's not a requirement. I just do it because I like them to have access to that information. And then we do not want those to be bold. It was just an old format that was sitting there. And notice how it's all right on the left margin. There's no tabs in here that make it look too big. And then over here on the right side is your estimated word count. So word count, we're going to be at, let's say 80,000 words. So I tabbed over from my first line, and you can see then it kind of pushed it to the second line. So it's going to back up and let them know your estimated word count. They can see it in the word count at the bottom of your screen, but it gives them a sense for if you know what their word count is for their lines, and did you pay attention to it? Like if they publish novels that are 50,000 to 60,000 words and you submit 80,000 words, most likely they are not going to look at it. So it just gives them an overview. And then approximately a third of the way down, you want to put your title. Go back here and copy and paste it from here. What I've done, because of copyright laws, I wanted to have a manuscript for something that I don't have to worry about breaking the copyright. So I chose an article that I've written, but we're formatting it as if it is a full novel. You have your title here, and then this is because it was for an article for a magazine, I had a subtitle, but you probably would put both of those together. If you had it, you put that at the top. And then your byline is next. And your byline is the name that you want it to be published under. So up here, we have our personal information. But here, if you're using a pseudonym, that's where you would post your pseudonym. I have already built in a page break. And if you're not using page breaks, we'll look at this. I'll break my chapter and I'll break my file into a couple chapters so we can play with it. But the reason for a page break, to use a page break that's built into the software, is so that it always starts the new chapter on a new page, and you don't end up having those weird gaps where there's more space than there should be. And one way to see that is in the Home tab, in the paragraph grouping, there's this backwards P. It's an old, if you know any of the old markups that editors use, it's a backwards P. It stands for paragraph. And when you click on that, it shows you the hidden symbols that are in the file that aren't printed, but it establishes the format. And so whenever there's a problem with your formatting, if you view that hidden symbols button, it will show you what happens. So here's an example. Let's say that I had a bunch of returns, because sometimes people hit return instead of setting the page break. And what happens when that happens is that then you have this, ends up with this blank page here, and your chapter doesn't start till here. So it looks a little funky. It would be even worse if it were kind of like that, where it's just randomly down a few pages. So without the hidden symbol showing, you might not know why your page doesn't show up for 2.5 pages. But when you turn it on, you can see that you need to go back and delete all these extra returns. And then putting your cursor in front of your first line that you want on the next page. You're going to use Insert, Pages, and Page Break. And it will look slightly different on your computer, but it is found in the same place. It's in the Insert tab, Pages, or Page Break. And that forces that to the next page. So if you look at the hidden symbols now, you can see the page break is here, and the next sentence goes on the next page. Let's turn that off because it's so distracting. But we will look at it again in a couple times. So the next thing is that you need a header on every page that has your last name, the title or a shortened version of the title, and the page number. And you don't want it on the first page. And Microsoft does allow you to do this. And one of the things I know people do is they use the templates in Word. And they're not awful, but they're not written by industry specialists. So they don't always work the way you want them to. So don't make a pretty margin that uses decorative, like colored fonts or something. You just want to use the same font that is in the rest of your paper. So to get to the margin, you can double click into the white space above. If you're using the Microsoft 365 version, you're going to have to do insert a header to get there, because the default for viewing in 365, it just shows this as a scrolling, like almost like a web page that doesn't show you these margins or the header and the footer, and that means you can't double click into that space. So you could just do insert, and then you could do header. It does give you some options on the header, but you want to use the unformatted one that shows the header in the top right. If you're in Microsoft Word. So don't use any of these pretty ones. I know they look fancy, but you don't want to use them. You just want to use text. So if I get into the header, I want to insert a page number. And usually in the Windows and the 365 version, when you're in the header, it brings up the header and footer tab. Like it's not always visible, but it's visible when you're in the header. And so you can just click from there. We want a different first page because the formatting says the title page doesn't get a page number. And then we want in the right on the right hand side, we want name, the title of the document, and the page number. So you're wanting to insert page number. Don't type a number in there. You're going to insert a page number. And Windows and Microsoft 365 version, there it will let you select. You want just the regular text that's on the right hand side. And if you're in a Mac, it'll let you do the right side, but it looks like a text box. So you have to go in there into the text box and click in front of the number to type in your name. So not my name, your name. Title of the manuscript, and the page number. And then I don't know that anybody's going to not look at your book just because you have the wrong font, but in the effort to have a clean manuscript, you want to change that to Microsoft 365 as well. And then in the header and footer tab, if you're in the header and footer tab, there's this big orange button on the right that lets you close the header out, or you can just double click into the regular part of your file, and it will go to this light color, which shows you that it's in the header. There's a couple things wrong with this. One of them is that even though we didn't want it on the first page, which it did not do, we need to tell it to start on page 0. So page 1 of the manuscript is page 1. So if we're in the page number and there is a way in Windows in 365 to format the page number. You want to start at the number 0 so that the first page of your document is page 1, and then it will go consecutively. If you see just the number 1 or the number 7 or whatever it is on every single page, it's because you have typed a character as far as the computer is concerned, and it needs to be inserted as a page number. All right, that's usually the worst of it. So let's look at how we would indent and organize the paragraphs. I don't know if you can see this, but these are not formatted evenly. So it's more than double spaced. After every return, when there's a start of a new paragraph, there's extra spacing. And that's put in there by Microsoft's developers, because if you're just using blocked script, you would want that extra space after a paragraph, just like if you were writing on the internet. But that is not what we want for this. So highlighting all of your text except for the title page that we've already finished. What we're going to do a couple of things, bringing up those line spacing again, or paragraph formatting options. So line spacing options, paragraph formatting options. So the alignment, I don't want to necessarily, well, I do. So I'm going to change it to left. We're going to have to change our chapter titles to be centered. But right now, we're just aligning it left. We have no additional indentations right now, so these should be blank or at 0. And then before and after, usually when the software doesn't tell you what the format is, it's because it's mixed. Like some places it's going to be centered, some places it's going to be left justified. Sometimes there is an indent. So if you're not seeing any numbers here, it's probably because somewhere in there's some interesting indentions, and we want to get rid of those. So make sure that the spacing before and after is set to 0, and that this is to double space. And then the last one I want you to do, so we've left justified, no extra indentions, no extra spacing before and after, double spacing here, and then we go up one more. And what this does is gives you the option for first line indent or a hanging indent. We're not going to deal with the hanging indent. The first line indent just makes sure that every single paragraph is indented at the beginning, and it should be by 1/2 inch. And I've had students do this where somebody's been messing with their computer and they've made it to centimeters instead of inches. So make sure it's 1/2 inch. And once you've got all of this at 0, first line at 1/2 inch, and total line spacing double, then you can select OK, and it should adjust the formatting for you. So now we don't have that weird space afterwards. Text should be aligned to the left, which means it should go up against this left margin, with the exception of titles, and we'll look at how to center those. And it shouldn't be even. So if you chose justified, I'll just show you, don't do this to yourself. But if I had it as regular, as justified, which spreads it out like in a book so that all the right and left margins are even, it creates not that one. Let me do it with a longer paragraph. There it is. It took me a minute to find it because you never use this. It makes it even on the right, but it is really hard on the eyes to read this if you're reading a lot of manuscripts at one time. So we don't want to use that. We want to make sure it's left justified, which leaves a jagged edge over here. And the first line of every paragraph is indented by 1/2 inch. So you don't have to hit tab anymore. It's automatically, every time you hit return, it's going to indent that first line for you. The sentences, and for those of you who learn to type on an actual typewriter, you probably learned to put 2 spaces after a period, which was the convention at the time. It is now changed to where it's a single period or single space after a period, and that can be a problem for people who automatically hit space after a period because that's the way they learn to type. So if that's you, you can write the whole paper or the whole manuscript with those double spaces, and then you command or Control A to highlight everything again. Do a find and replace, and you have the find is 2 spaces and The replace is a single space. So that's all you're typing in there. There's no letters. You're just typing double space in the first line, a single space in the first one, and do replace all. And it's going to replace all of the double spaces that you've done. All right, scene breaks. So scene breaks, let me see if I can find, like, here's a good place. Well, except for let me put it on a separate page so we can kind of get it all on the same page. So here's an example of where this was an article, but say this was a scene break in a manuscript. What you can do is leave a blank, leave white space here, which works, except when it's formatted, particularly for ebooks, it's not always clear that there's double spacing. So the other option is to use 3 asterisks or pounds or blank line to indicate a scene break. So you could leave it like this. You could do 1, 2, 3, which is my preference, or you could do 1, 2, 3. And those are old typesetter symbols that let them know that there should be a scene break there. And then you want to center it. What you don't want to do after you type those 3 is hit enter, because it auto formats for you. And then you've got to figure out how to undo the auto format. So just type in the 3 asterisks, center them, and then you can do the next line or the next scene. No fancy fonts or colors, black ink only, including up here in the header, maybe especially up there in the header. Italics. So if you require italics for some reason, like you want the character's internal thoughts to be in italics, or you want to emphasize a word with italics, use italics. It used to be that we underlined it, but again, that was before we used digitized files to typeset. Now that we have digitized files, we don't need to use the underline. If you want to italicize, use it italicized in the text. There will be some style guides for publishers that use italics for certain things. For example, my publisher, if it's a sound like bang, it is italicized. That is nothing you have to worry about now. Just know that they may add those kinds of things when you're in the copy edit stage. At the end, we're going to work on chapter breaks, but as long as we're talking about how to end it, you could just type end and center like that. You could do the end, or you could do the old typesetter end. It would need to be in Microsoft Word format, which is why you're here. I know a lot of people resist, but it is the format of business, and it is the format most publishers use. In fact, I've never had them use anything else. So for those of you who like using a free source like Google Docs, you may want to consider changing. And a big part of that is once you've written it in Google Docs and tried to convert it to Word, there will be weirdnesses around the headers in particular and other formatting things that then you would have to go back and fix. So it's just easier if you use Microsoft Word when you begin. All right, the next thing, or the last thing I want to talk about, is new chapters. So a new chapter would look like 1. Let me have the words. Okay, so first, it would need to be centered, but we don't want to leave it with that first line indent there, because then that will make the center be off center. So you want to hit backspace so that chapter 1 is all the way against the margin, or if you have a different title for chapter 1, and then you're going to center the title. And some writers will have, because if you've noticed in books, when you're reading them, the first line is not indented. The first line sometimes has a special character, but it sometimes isn't indented. It doesn't hurt to have the tab there, because the software that the publisher uses to convert the text to an e-file will take care of that for you. So either would be considered okay. But one thing that you want to note is that chapter 1 doesn't go all the way up to the top. It's about a third of the way down. And I don't know, you kind of have to just wag it. I once upon a time had them counted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so usually 12 or 13 lines on a page is going to be that this is a third of the way down. So the chapter shouldn't be up at the top, but a third of the way down. And then when you get to the next chapter, so let's see if I can find a good, let's say we're going to start the next chapter. We're going to call it Protect the Reader. And so how you're going to get to the next page is not to hit enter a bunch of times, because when you do that and then you edit your file and you add a couple paragraphs, now your next chapter is starting in a weird place. It's starting on this bottom of the page with that format. So what you want to do instead is get rid of all those extra lines. Put your cursor in front of the line you want on the next page, and you're going to insert page break. And so if you see that hidden symbol is a page break that forces it to the next page, and you don't see a bunch of return marks. I'm going to turn that off because it does get hard to view that way. And then again, we're going to want this centered. Doesn't need to be bolded, and it needs to be approximately a third of the page down. Okay. And then that would be centered with your cursor anywhere in that line, center it, and now you've got chapter 2 set up. It really is that simple. Don't overthink it. If it's not perfect, it's not the end of the world. Let me know if you have questions.